Welcome to Creative Connections, connecting the creative, creatively connecting everything else. Today we're looking up, quite literally, at one of Britain's most remarkable summer visitors, the swift. You may hear them before you properly see them. That high, urgent call above the rooftops, and then a dark crescent flicking through the sky. The thing I want to understand is this: are swifts really birds that spend almost their whole lives in the air?
Yes, they are. That's the extraordinary thing about them. Swifts are among the most aerial birds we have. They feed on the wing, drink on the wing, and even sleep while flying. They come down to breed, but much of their life is lived in the air, not just above the world, but almost apart from it.
The idea of sleeping in flight sounds almost implausible. What do we actually know about that?
It's not sleep in the human sense of switching off for hours, but swifts can enter periods of rest while still flying, and that alone tells you how completely adapted they are to life in the air. They may climb very high into smoother air and keep flying while part of the brain rests. They have adapted for long, continuous flight in a way that most birds simply have not.
So this isn't just a bird that happens to be good at flying. Its whole body is organized around that way of life.
Exactly. Look at the shape of a swift. It has long, narrow, scythe-shaped wings built for speed and efficiency. It's not shaped like a robin or a blackbird, which can hop about, perch easily, and move between hedges and lawns. A swift is a specialist. Even its legs are tiny. The scientific name of the common swift is Apus apus. Apus comes from an ancient Greek word meaning without feet. Not because swifts literally have no feet, but because their feet are so small and rarely seen and are mainly useful for clinging to vertical surfaces near a nest site. They are birds built for the air, not for walking about on the ground.
So if a swift is found on the ground, that's not a normal situation?
No. A healthy adult may sometimes manage to take off from the ground, but the ground is not where a swift belongs. If you see one grounded, it may be exhausted, underweight, injured, or a young bird in difficulty. Their normal launch is from height, and their normal life is above us.
That's a useful shift in perspective. From below, we may just see fast birds overhead, but really we are looking at a creature with a very different relationship to the world.
Yes, a garden bird lives in a world of branches, fences, lawns, worms, seeds, and perches. A swift occupies a world of air currents, insects, weather, rooflines, and distance. It experiences the sky not as a route between places, but as the place itself.
And late May is a good moment to talk about them because they're arriving back in the UK.
Yes, swifts usually begin arriving in the UK from late April and into May. By the end of May, they become one of the signs that summer has properly begun. They have travelled from Africa to breed here, and then after a short breeding season they leave again, often in August.
So their time here is short.
Very short. That's part of their hold on people who notice them. They arrive suddenly, they fill the air with movement and sound, and then, almost before summer is finished, they're gone. Their presence makes summer feel more alive, but their absence also marks its passing.
The sound is quite distinctive, isn't it? It's not a conventional bird song.
No, not at all. It's not melodic in the way a blackbird is melodic. It's a high, piercing, excited scream. When several swifts fly together around rooftops, people often describe them as screaming parties. That phrase sounds informal, but it captures the experience well. A group of birds racing together at speed, calling as they pass.
What's going on in those screaming parties? Is it display, social behaviour, or something to do with nesting?
A bit of all of that, but it is strongly connected with social behaviour around nesting areas. Breeding birds are tied to established sites, while younger birds may investigate places where they could nest in future. The calls and the fast group flights are part of the social world of swifts. For us, they have another effect. They make an ordinary street suddenly feel connected to something wild and far-travelled.
That's one of the striking things. We tend to think of migration and wild nature as happening somewhere remote, but swifts bring it into streets, rooftops and buildings.
Exactly. A swift can cross continents and then return to a small gap under the eaves of a house. That contrast is astonishing, this vast aerial life and then a very precise dependence on a tiny nesting place in a building.
Why are buildings so important to them?
Historically, swifts would have used natural crevices, cliffs, holes in trees, rocky places, but in the UK they have become closely associated with buildings. They nest in small cavities high up, under eaves, behind fascia boards, in roof spaces, or in gaps in older walls. The nest itself is usually hidden, so you may have swifts using a building without ever seeing a visible nest.
Do they return to the same nest site each year?
Often, yes. Swifts are very site faithful. If a pair has used a nest successfully, they may come back to the same site year after year. That faithfulness is part of what makes them vulnerable. If the entrance is blocked during renovation or the roofline is sealed, the birds may lose a site they have depended on.
So improvements to buildings can accidentally remove their homes.
Yes, we repair roofs, insulate lofts, replace fascias, seal gaps, and make buildings more airtight. None of that's done with the intention of harming swifts, but the small imperfections in older buildings were often the places they used. A neater, tighter building may be better for us and worse for them.
That's an interesting connection. The bird that seems to belong to the open sky is partly dependent on the untidy edges of human architecture.
It is. Swifts turn our buildings into substitute cliffs. A roofline becomes part of a migration route. A little gap under the eaves becomes a returning point after thousands of miles of travel.
And their numbers have declined significantly in the UK, haven't they?
Sadly, yes, swifts are now on the UK Red List of conservation concern. The decline is substantial, and the likely pressures include loss of nest sites, reduced availability of flying insects, and poor weather during the breeding season. It's probably not one single cause. It's a combination of pressures across different parts of their life cycle.
The loss of insects matters because swifts feed entirely in the air.
Yes. They feed on flying insects and airborne spiders, sometimes described as aerial plankton. That phrase is helpful because it reminds us that the air isn't empty. To us, a summer sky may look clear. To a swift, it's a feeding ground full of tiny life.
So when we watch a swift cutting across the sky, it may be feeding all the time.
Very possibly. It may be feeding, travelling, socialising, or returning to a nest site. But feeding is central to its life. It's catching small insects at speed, often so quickly that we can't see what's happening. We see the flight. The swift is reading a whole moving landscape of food, wind, and weather.
That phrase, aerial plankton, also changes the way you think about insect decline. It's not just about insects as separate creatures, it's about the food web above us.
Exactly. If there are fewer flying insects, that affects the birds that depend on them. A swift may seem remote because it's so high and fast, but it's still connected to what happens on the ground. Land use, pesticides, gardens, water, weather, and the abundance of insects rising into the air.
So the bird that appears most free is not independent.
No, that's one of the most interesting things about swifts. They seem so free, always moving, always in the air, but they still depend on the conditions around them. They need enough insects to feed on, suitable weather, and safe nesting spaces. And because they often nest in buildings, they also depend on us leaving or creating places where they can breed.
What about the migration itself? How far have they actually travelled by the time they reach our rooftops?
Swifts migrate between Europe and their wintering areas in Africa. They arrive here from late April into May to breed, and most leave again from early August. The RSPB describes the journey as more than 6,000 miles twice a year, with swifts stopping to refuel in places such as Portugal and France along the way.
So they do stop on the way, but they are still living much of that journey in the air?
Yes, they're not travelling like geese in a neat visible formation, or stopping each night in the way we might imagine. They can feed as they travel, catching insects on the wing. But tracking work by the British Trust for Ornithology has also shown that they may use important stopover sites. One tracked swift travelled about 5,000 kilometres, just over 3,100 miles, from West Africa back to the UK in only 5 days after stopping for 15 days in Liberia.
It's not just the distance, is it? It's the fact they can come back to such a specific place.
Yes, distance on its own is impressive, but precision makes it more intimate. These birds travel thousands of miles, yet they may return not just to the UK or even to a particular town, but to the same local area and sometimes the same nest entrance, a gap under a roof that most people would never notice.
Is that why they make such an impression once people have learned to recognize them?
I think so. They're not tame or approachable. They don't sit obligingly on a feeder. They're hard to photograph and often hard to follow with the eye. But they become part of the atmosphere of a place. A street with swifts has a different feeling in summer. Their sound is brief, intense, and seasonal, and that makes it memorable.
It's a sound that announces summer, but because they leave so early, it also carries a reminder that summer will not last.
Yes, the first swifts can feel like a beginning. Their departure can feel like the first small ending. They are a seasonal clock made of wings and sound.
If someone wants to help swifts, what actually makes a difference?
The most practical thing is to protect or provide nesting spaces. Swift boxes can be added to suitable buildings, and swift bricks can be built into new developments or renovations. Local swift groups also do a lot of useful work recording existing nest sites and helping people understand where boxes or bricks are most likely to work.
So helping swifts is not only about protecting distant wild places. It can also mean making room for them in the buildings and streets where we already live.
Exactly. Swifts are part of the built environment as well as the natural one. We don't need to turn towns into nature reserves, but we can make sure buildings don't exclude wildlife completely.
And roof repairs must be part of that, because a small gap under the eaves may be a nest site.
Yes. If swifts are using a building, it's worth being careful with the timing of any roof work. Repairs may sometimes be better left until after the breeding season, and a local swift group, wildlife organisation, or suitably experienced roofer may be able to help identify the nest entrance so it's not accidentally closed off. Losing a nest site is not a minor inconvenience. Swifts have a short breeding season here, and they may not have time to find a good alternative. A gap under a roof may seem like a small detail to us, but from the swift's point of view, it can be central.
Our helping swifts need someone to realise they are there in the first place.
Exactly, and that can be the difficulty.
So there's something interesting here about what we notice and what we miss. Swifts may be above our streets every summer, but unless we know what to look and listen for, they can remain almost invisible to us.
Yes, and once you do notice them, the street changes a little. The roofline becomes more interesting, the sound above you has a source, and a small gap under the eaves can turn out to be part of a much larger journey.
Wildness above the ordinary.
Yes, above the supermarket car park, the railway station, the churchyard, the terrace, the school roof, swifts bring a very old migratory life into the everyday world. Looked at another way, swifts connect the vast and the specific. Migration across continents, insects in the air, summer weather, old buildings, and a tiny nest site they may return to year after year.
And perhaps that's why their return feels so special. They are not just passing overhead, they are coming back to places that have mattered before.
Yes, for us they're a sign that summer has arrived. For them, this is part of a much longer journey, one that briefly brings our streets, rooftops, and skies into their lives.
If someone is listening to this in early summer and wants to know whether they have swifts nearby, what should they notice?
Listen for high screaming calls around rooftops, especially on warm evenings. Swifts are easy to confuse with swallows and house martins because all three are summer visitors that catch insects in flight. But swifts are usually the darker, more crescent-shaped birds with long curved wings and a very fast, scything flight. Swallows have long tail streamers and are often seen perching on wires. House martins are smaller looking, with a white underside and a distinctive white rump, and they often build mud nests under eaves.
So we may have heard swifts many times without realizing what they were.
Yes, many people will have heard that sharp, high-pitched screaming call around rooftops without knowing it was swifts. Once you can put a name to it, the street feels different. The sound is no longer just part of the background, but a sign that these extraordinary birds are back.
Once you know what you're listening for, an ordinary roofline starts to feel more interesting.
It does. A small opening under the eaves may be a nest site. A scream overhead is not just background noise. It may be a bird that has travelled thousands of miles to return to that particular place.
That gives the whole scene a different scale, a normal British street connected to a much bigger journey.
Exactly. Swifts connect the sky to the street. They connect migration with rooflines, insects with architecture, and the sound of summer with a hidden nest site under the eaves. They seem to belong to the open air, but their story also passes through the places we build and the choices we make.
And perhaps that's why they are such a good subject for late May. They're arriving above us just as summer gathers pace, but they're easy to miss unless we look and listen properly.
Yes, they are not birds you usually see close up. You notice them as fast shapes in the sky and sharp calls around rooftops. But once you learn to recognize them, they become part of the sound and movement of summer.
So next time you hear that high call above the rooftops, look up.
Yes, because that sound may be one of the UK's most remarkable summer visitors back above our streets.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Creative Connections, come back next time and we'll draw a new map of connections. Wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast, please like, subscribe, or follow because it helps us keep the channel going and build even more creative connections.